So it's unusual and very pleasant to discover what appears to be a damp patch is in fact dry. In this case, it appears to be the paint itself that's caused the darkened colour. The damp looking zones are where the painter would have what's called cut in at the beginning and end of the painting cycle. It's probable that the mix wasn't correct or another batch of paint was used. It's difficult to know. The simple solution is just to repaint those zones. Unfortunately, it may be necessary to colour match the whole wall. Painting is clearly outside my area of expertise, except to say that a recently replastered wall needs to have a mist coat, that is 50% water, 50% paint, in order for the paint to be absorbed into the plaster and adhere to it properly. You can see in the bathroom there's an example where it hasn't stuck properly, and you can see the result of that. In this case it looks like there must have been a mist coat of paint because the paint has adhered to the wall. Here you see me using a Protimeter damp meter. These damp meters cost about £500, and more or less all surveyors, especially damp surveyors, will use them. They have both conductance pins for surface dampness, and they use radio waves set at the resonance frequency of water to detect dampness deep within a wall. There is another damp meter which does exactly the same thing and costs £18, and in my opinion it's just as good, in fact in many respects better. I feel greater reliability with that type of damp meter. Ultimately a damp meter is not quantitative, it's qualitative. That's to say that it's not the actual number that's important, it's the relative number, because all walls are going to have a different density to each other. But if one part of the wall is much denser than another part, then that's significant.
So the normal level is 40%, and this is showing the normal level. So this is a great gadget that I recommend anyone buy.
What is it called?
It's a damp meter. But normal is 6, and it's 0 there.
So as in most of my surveys, I will look at the other side of the wall first, just in case the owner is there and is about to go out. So I have two opportunities, one at the beginning of the survey and one at the end of the survey, to check the other side of the damp wall. So I actually tried the other side of this damp wall before testing the client's damp wall, and I discovered that the other side of the damp wall was dry, leading me to conclude that it wasn't coming from the neighbour. And in fact it turns out that there was no dampness anyway.
So this is showing basically normal levels of dampness.
Okay.
In fact, if I do it on the wall, which we can see is dry, then it's showing the same amount.
And that wall, the window wall, where, you know, that dark area, that's normal. Well, it's the same wall, isn't it?
What, downstairs?
No, like
Oh.
these, you know, how in the corner. Because what I don't understand, how comes it's there, but not on this side?
Well, it is true. It's on the edges.
Yeah.
I'll have. I mean, it's not. It isn't damp.
Okay. Yeah.
But whether it's caused by dampness in the past, the way it's dried,
Oh, okay.
and that's changed the look of the paint,
Oh, okay.
the consistency of the paint, whether that's true. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. I would say every property has a risk of
Yes.
mould and condensation,
Yes, of course, yeah.
but sometimes it just goes way beyond.
Yeah.
Okay,
but ours is not, right?
And yours is not. But so the standard place for finding mould is in here, around the tops. But you know, you're clearly keeping the windows open, and listening to my video, so
Yes,
you've learnt a lot.
Exactly.
But you would see a line of condensation up here because
okay,
that's
okay.
where the wall is
Roof.
thinnest.
Okay.
Because the distance between the inside and outside is at its lowest
Slowest
there.
there.
Whereas
Okay.
that you wouldn't particularly expect to see. It is possible because sometimes you have material that causes
Seeps.
dampness. So
Okay.
impermeable material can cause. So this is timber. It's not
Yeah.
impermeable,
It's permeable.
but
goes
it's
through,
permeable.
yeah.
It absorbs
It
moisture
absorbs water,
basically.
Yeah.
But
And sorry to butt in, but the cracks and whatnot that wouldn't be causing.
well, the crack.
that wouldn't be causing the condensation.
It's outside my area of expertise,
course.
but the typical reason is because these bays were made for single pane glass. Double pane glass is a lot heavier, and it causes a small amount of movement.
Pressure. Okay.
But
okay.
but it's not typically a dangerous thing.
No,
It's
no.
just settled.
Yeah.
But that's outside my competence. But
No, that's fine.
but that is the general rule.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's interesting the way it's formed, and so there is a risk of getting condensation
Yeah,
here
yeah.
because, but this is you've got an external, so you've got a neighbour on the left hand side.
Yeah.
If you were on the corner of the building on that side, you would have a risk because you've got heat loss from the two sides. But
Yes.
in this case, your neighbour's keeping you warm.
Okay.
So it wouldn't look like that, but it may be that that's the way it's dried.
Right.
It will typically dry from the top downwards and from the inside to the out.
Okay. Yeah. I'm with
So
you.
that may be the way the paint and plaster has reacted together. But I have to say, I haven't seen this before.
Oh no.
But that's not a bad thing because it's easy to solve.
Yes. Okay,
That's the key thing.
Yeah.
So this property also had a known leak from the heating system. There's a brown stain. You can tell water that's passed through building material because it picks up the colour from the timber and the building material. When it's dark like this, it's because the water has passed through timber. If it's passed through brick, it tends to be a much lighter colour, but it's the same concept of water passing through building material, which normally tells me that it's either a leak, in this case it's the heating system, or it's penetrating damp if it's on an external wall, and that will be because rainwater is finding its way through a gap in the render or similar issue.
I'm up for helping people as much as possible. So this number here doesn't mean it's 100% wet. It doesn't even, I'll put it down to, it was on masonry. It doesn't even mean it's 100% saturated.
Okay.
It's just a number. And unfortunately they put a percentage next to it because the first damp meter people did that. But it doesn't mean anything. I wouldn't worry about it. What you want to do is you want to find a dry piece of equivalent wall and see what that number is.
Okay.
And then you know what you're aiming for. And don't worry about the number.
Okay. So just worry about the beeping. So if it's
Just
beeping,
worry
that
about the
means,
beeping.
yeah.
It's a relative number that's important.
Okay. Okay.
Well,
that's
don't worry about the beeping because that's just put on there by the manufacturers. But it's and I'll also show you. Do you notice how I'm actually? Oh, that will work fine. This is the surface, but actually the surface. Oh no, I'll do it. You need to move it onto that where it says building, right? And the surface is showing 25 there, and it's showing it's 6 there. So yeah, the surface is also damp. But again, it's don't worry about the percentage.
Okay.
I would use the radio frequency, the radio wave version.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I'll explain how it works. So it's basically sending radio waves at the resonance frequency for moisture.
Okay.
It can't tell the difference between certain things. So if I put it onto a phone or bit of, you see that metal,
Oh. Yes.
it's because the radio waves are bouncing back.
Oh.
But in a normal wall,
Yes.
and it's saying, and by the way, it's not the corner wouldn't pick it up. It's the
The flat surface.
flat surface. It's working like Radar, it's a bit like radar.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think I know what you mean. So,
Yeah.
basically,
So if
someone
you
writing
had
down-
stealth damp, you wouldn't pick it up. So to some extent, there's always a risk of vapour from showers causing problems to paint. But in this case, it looks like it's been painted straight onto plaster, and you're supposed to use what's called a mist coat.
Oh, yes.
So it's diluted 50-50,
Yeah.
50% water, 50% the paint, and you use that as an undercoat.
Yeah.
Or primer, in fact, and then you probably need to have 2 coats on top.
Okay.
I would, generally speaking, emulsion should work. Modern day emulsion should work,
Yeah.
but you might consider bathroom paints.
Okay.
The trouble with bathroom paints is that they reduce the amount of vapour that can be absorbed into a wall.
Okay, 'cause they're
So if you look at the
literally-
last property that I surveyed,
Okay.
they were using bathroom paints in the living room, and that was part of the problem.
Oh.
In this case, the downstairs bathroom extractor fan wasn't working. I tried to fix it. I determined that there was electricity going into it, but clearly the fan itself is defective. So here I investigated other areas and found a thin crack on the outside between the insulation and the normal wall. A thin render crack can cause a lot of water to be absorbed. It acts like a capillary, drawing water in, its capillary action, and it either needs to be painted with an impermeable paint, probably the best thing to do in this case, or for larger cracks it should be filled with an external acrylic caulk, and cracks of 3 millimeters or more you should use a cement-based mortar. The problem with cement-based mortar is it won't move and the crack is more likely to return. I normally use an infrared lens where dark blue is about 5 degrees colder than light red or orange. Note that the temperature is relative and it's constantly changing. An infrared camera can be very helpful for identifying where there's dampness or where there's a risk of dampness. There's a risk of dampness where there are cold spots, because cold spots increase the risk of condensation, and most properties in the UK have excess internal vapour levels. In a well ventilated property, the internal dew point should be close to or slightly above the external dew point. Dew point is a measure of the amount of vapour in air as expressed as a degree centigrade. Here you'll see that the machine engineered bricks are creating heat loss around the gaps. There's no dampness actually in this case, but it's interesting to see the way that different materials insulate the property. We can see there's a lot more heat loss at the rear of the property, suggesting that it's poorly insulated. In this case, it's because the flank wall has been insulated, but the rear of the wall hasn't been. This creates an area of risk to the rear.
So even though I don't think you've got a damp issue here, you have a risk in this sort of shape thing here. You've got metal, and metal causes heat loss. And here you've got the metal from the wiring. In fact, if I put it on. So if I was doing a survey for you as a buyer, I would look for the areas of risk, and I'd see in the thermal image that this was colder, and I'd see that you've got these metal beams, RSJs here, and so I would test with this, and that seems fine. Also in the corners you have a risk, that's relatively high. And that's high as well. So you've got definite risk of dampness there, and arguably that is damp. As a comparison, I'm going to show you on the sort of more expert level, and you'll see that it goes off the scale. But you can actually calibrate the digital. So the protimeter is showing 999. Do you see how it just goes straight off the scale?
Yeah.
More so. That's why. But The reason why is you've got metal beading here, and you got a risk of condensation forming around metal beading, but it's because the metal beading gets cold.
Yes, yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it's and also underneath it so that's the radio frequency. And if I move it on to the surface, it's not showing. So a lot of surveyors just use the surface. I personally don't. But in this case, the surface is fine. It's actually often the if it's dried out from the surface, it doesn't show, but it's still damp deep inside.
Oh, okay.
So here I'm measuring the subfloor relative humidity. It's normal.
This is a hygrometer probe, and I'll just put this in underneath the floor. You want to dangle it through, and then you can measure the subfloor humidity.
Okay.
Just check once a week. I've got one, and I did have a leak, and I found it and spotted it and sorted it immediately. If you don't, you run a risk of getting dry rot.
Yeah.
Or any
So would
type
you
of rot.
suggest to do that downstairs and obviously upstairs?
No,
as well?
any of the subfloor void. Upstairs is not a problem because
okay.
like you see it immediately.
So in quick summary, there are no major problems in this property. I saw a pipe that had come away, but there wasn't causing any dampness inside. Likewise, the crack wasn't causing dampness. There was known leak that will take 6 months, potentially more time to dry out. The bathroom extractor fan isn't working properly, but the kitchen extractor fan is. Dehumidifier should be 20 litres per day capacity. That's measured at 80% relative humidity in a 30 degree centigrade climate such as Hong Kong. The property is dry, and apologies for using this illustration, but it's a simple way of showing people that the property is dry.